Meditation leads us to the greatest form of well-being that one could experience. It can allow us to see the Dhamma as it opens the doors to the deathless, because it can go beyond the conditioned. It can take us beyond samsara, cycle of rebirth, beyond anicca, beyond dukkha, beyond conditionality, and beyond ignorance, that now, especially, is the dominating force on this planet, ignorance. But we cannot force the Dhamma to appear in the heart, in the mind, simply because we're wanting it so badly. We must first deserve it by cleaning up the inside of the heart or mind first from all the junk of the unwholesome. There's no way around this. Kamma, or the established patterns of behavior, if you will, lies within our hearts, because that is where we have collected all the negative seeds of our thoughts, our words, our actions committed in the past, as we continue to do so even now in the present. Today, perhaps more than ever, humanity suffers. But more than suffering from dukkha, we have to look at underneath the cause of suffering, and that is where we find wrong view. Humanity suffers from wrong view today, perhaps more than ever, and on such a grand scale, as it becomes more and more collectivistic, while neglecting to take action in the most important arena of life, to work on oneself. Instead, entire masses of people are being led to feel self-righteous as they look upon with some sense of indignation, or just blatant indignation, at other groups. And the other groups are doing the same thing to this group, where each side is thinking of itself to be just, to be in the right, to be fair, to be caring and even compassionate, whether about their own fellow man or environment, etc. This is just madness. This is wrong view. This is ignorance, as far as the Dhamma is concerned. As the group itself and its position has become the standard of progress, of truth or wisdom. Seeking one's own individual truth, one's own path, irrespective of any groups, is becoming a thing of the past, as we create this colorless, this lukewarm society of ours. But we neglect to investigate how nowhere in our human history have we seen the collective being wise or even take a wise action. It's always been the individual, the one who risks it all despite the circumstances. And that is what we lack today, especially as it relates to the Dhamma. As the quest for experiencing Nibbana involves great risk-taking, requires courage every minute of one's life, as one empties out one's heart from the toxins of ignorance, of pride, and wrong views. This requires tremendous courage. That's why the Buddha's path is the path of the brave, not the coward. When one attains release through Nibbana, one experiences it through one's own efforts, not the grace of someone else, one's teacher, or someone giving it to them. There's no such thing. No one gives it to us. The Buddha never gave Nibbana to anyone. So what my encouragement, my attempt at encouraging you here is to focus on the fact that our work is not with the world, but with ourselves. Your job is to see, to persevere, and diligently work on controlling the mind and not become a victim to Mara's traps, basically, of looking at fixing the world around us as our primary objective. That is not what the Buddha taught, period. Has nothing to do with the Dhamma, nothing. No matter how one might feel good about oneself having changed, it's nonsense when you're looking at the house is burning and you're in it. Dukkha. Get out of the house that is on fire. That is the message of the Buddha. Everything else is nonsense. So it is through one's own individual work, concentrated onto a single goal of working on oneself. And what happens is that there are no more unwholesome seeds left in the heart, for it has gone beyond ignorance. And that which was brought into the heart through ignorance is no more. No more. Because we all know this. Darkness cannot dwell where there is light. That is the light of insight, of wisdom, which this path is all about. It's not about tradition, it's not about this, it's not about techniques, this, and it is about wisdom to see, to see. This is where the Dhamma, by the way, resides, in the heart, which oftentimes is called also the Chitta. Unfortunately, though, it is blanketed in the thick mire of our kileshas, our defilements. You see, we need to understand that the Dhamma cannot be smelled, but it can be touched. Only touched and experienced by the heart. It has nothing to do with being sensational or from being presented as a sensational phenomenon, or to advertise and entertain people so they become interested in joining this group or that, or to come to this retreat or that in order for them to experience the sensational experience of something. That has nothing to do with the Dhamma. The Dhamma is much bigger than any movement, any reform, any ritual, any prayer, any utterance, all of which function on the level of the salayatana, which are the 6 sense bases, which, by the way, all belong to the world of the conditioned. The Dhamma cannot be displayed, or whether to be admired or marveled at, as these are also things that belong to the realm of ignorance, or you might want to call it ego, to use a Western terminology. However, the Dhamma can be taught by a Buddha or his noble disciples. who have seen it and know it for themselves, and can therefore guide a person who is willing to put forth the effort and has the humility to break through. For some reason, many students want to attain something of the Dhamma, or to get the Dhamma somehow to be rubbed off on them, while secretly wanting that they too can become somehow marvelous. Perhaps it's to fill up some old need for validation, of becoming or being accepted, adored perhaps, respected, and loved. But that has nothing to do with the Dhamma, nor will their efforts touch its profundity, because only the relinquishing heart, the heart that has been experienced itself going beyond identifications with and of the world. Such a heart could see it, could actually see it, the Dhamma. The humble and the unobsessed mind is needed that fearlessly keeps emptying out those seeds of the unwholesome thoughts, unwholesome words, unwholesome tendencies of the mind, and therefore actions of the body. Emptying out those seeds from the heart is basically the opposite of self-worship that many are engaged in today in our culture, in our society, who never really want to risk anything, as they hold on to this flimsy idea of self, never wanting to see what's what, to break through, to go beyond. After all, the world of phenomenal displays of this light show of all things conditioned, so long as they're captivating the heart, such a self-worshipping person will not come to know the Dhamma, nor be moved by it. It is for this reason that the Buddha calls the person who is willing to go the distance, is humble enough, is kind, is generous. The person who is not adhering to this self-idea as the person who can see the Dhamma, see. And when they do, they are known as someone who possesses the eye of Dhamma. Because they're no longer the same person. Hence, the Buddha's use of the word sotapanna, the person who has entered the stream, past the point of no return. No way of turning back, which in itself can be fearsome enough for so many people, for them to keep postponing it or to never come to realize it, sadly. It is this fear of fully trusting and not being able to turn back that keeps a person stuck in the rut of ignorance. It's almost like spinning their wheels in place, unable to move forward. And in this spiritual or religious practice, if one is not moving forward, then one is definitely moving backwards. One cannot remain stationary. So what I'm saying is fearlessness is required for this path. which can only manifest within the individual, not the crowd. Not the crowd. So the Dhamma cannot be exhibited in display cases or altars or on podiums, on retreats, in videos, YouTube videos, or sold out auditoriums by notable speakers, some famous teacher, for example, or some gatherings of like-minded people. But it can be revealed through what it does to the heart, the mind, through the use and exposure to the words of the Buddha or his disciples and their deeds, their actions that touch the heart of the individual today. The individual who is willing to take the leap beyond the limited world of me. This is mine. This is myself. This is who I am. Someone who is willing to crash through that thick glass wall. Unafraid, fearless, brave. So if someone comes to me and says, well, Nibbana is only something that you see in books, in the suttas, in history. Yeah, so long as we're surrounded by cowards, yes, I agree with you. But show me that fearless person and I will show you a person who's going to be experiencing Nibbana. If they follow the Eightfold Path, that is, without changing anything, without injecting their own me, myself, minus, my thing, my identity into this Dhamma. They cannot coexist. But people every day becoming eager to subscribe to this or that position or ideology or movement, what they're basically doing is relinquishing their freedom to think based on some values that they are being fed from the outside world. That further nourishes the bitter and nasty seeds of ignorance in the heart. Therefore, this all or nothing way of thinking deprives us from thinking on a more proactive way of transforming ourselves. And instead choosing to focus on an easier, less courageous task. Hey, let's go outside and change the world. This is something that we also see even at the time of the Buddha, where people tried doing this by, for example, worshiping the Buddha, or claiming that they believe in him, or doing some type of a puja or some type of a bhakti or devotional worship of him. But as a good teacher that he was, or is, he was very sharp and decisive in chastising them on this. Very swift. He redirected the person back to being courageous enough to do the task of transforming oneself, dealing with the seeds of ignorance in one's heart directly, and not those of others. So instead of trying to change the world, which is cowardly, because it's cowardly only if it is in the absence of doing the strenuous work of taking charge of changing one's life. That's the only context I would use the word cowardly in. So one is encouraged strongly to place the work of oneself first, because from that, everything beautiful is going to emanate, manifest, and change the world. I've been saying this for many years now. It's from the inside out, a work that is done from the inside out, from clearing up the defilements from one's heart first. Everything else changes. None of the great disciples of the Buddha, by the way, believed in him, nor encouraged that kind of movement. Each of his students, if they were real, true practitioners, they knew that it was up to them to bring about any sort of change in themselves and to break away from the ignorance of yesterday. And this could only happen by taking care of the Dhamma within one's heart. Today's society, to a great extent, has adopted the collectivistic and postmodern approach to everything, which sadly means that it also ensures that a Buddha could never arise, because the Buddha is an individual, a risk taker, which apparently today's society doesn't have much room for such an entity. A courageous person who's not afraid to stand out, to stand alone, and for the right reasons. To be a true rebel, if there's ever been one, that can change things, because he's gone to the utmost depths within himself, transforming himself, challenging and taking responsibility of oneself. Hence, he is called a true teacher. But every day we see how in this circus that we call humanity, there's no room for such courage. And if anyone dares to speak or hum to a different tune, we go after them. The social media world, or anywhere actually, is full of, what's the term? Trolls. People who disagree with you and all of a sudden come after you. Wow. By using a cowardly collectivistic voice based on ignorance, which now has become massive. Not in its authenticity, but in its scale of its faceless ignorance. Yeah, today, everyone wants to change the world, change others, when they can't even change themselves, their thoughts, can't even sit still for more than a few seconds, or stop themselves from using the F word, can't control their actions, let alone their unwholesome thoughts. Yet, we have the audacity to say, I want to change the world. Although on the surface, it makes one feel good about themselves, and definitely makes them get attention from others, and sympathy and support. But it's just an escape. It's still a ruse. It's basically, to me, it says that the person is only running away from taking on the responsibility for themselves and their actions in regards to the work that needs to be done, which involves breaking this cycle of ignorance, and not that of the world. If you look at the suttas, if you look at the message that the Buddha was giving for 45 years, you see him repeating himself so many ways, that we will never fix the world's problems. The only one we can fix is ourselves. This, to me, is the truest sense of individual freedom that I know, because we cannot see it being taken away from us or being sullied in any way. So the individual's responsibility is number one, which, by the way, is lacking terribly in the world of Dhamma practice. Every facet of our society as human beings, as we see people pointing the pejorative finger at the outside world, demanding to be different than what they think, to something that they think should be the case. So there's a lot of stories being thrown at us ever since we were children, but there's a lot of stories that we've been telling of ourselves, identifying with. So my encouragement here is to kind of not just to suggest, but just to say, to stop believing the story of your life. What you've been telling yourself. I am this, I am that, whatever that or this might be. These are all old ways of thinking, and if they do not bring peace to the mind, that is. But if they do bring peace to the mind, to the heart, then they definitely are worth keeping. We must do our individual work instead of joining others' voices or relying on this or that narrative. So the Dhamma is all about healthy newness. It is only about the person, the individual who can know it for themselves. Each of the bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, upasakas, and upasikas, lay and male disciples, male and female disciples, that is, were responsible for themselves, their behavior, their own behavior, their thinking, their understanding, and practice of virtue, morality, sila. Also their mental cultivation, their samadhi, and their progression in developing discernment or wisdom, panya. This gives the person back the integrity and responsibility to live one's life deliberately and with awareness. After all, that's what sati is all about. That's what sati sampajanya is all about. Mindfulness and clear comprehension are all about. So today, to protect and save whatever is left that is worth saving of this world, which I keep seeing it as becoming more and more lukewarm, requires us to own up to our responsibility and start with ourselves and not fall prey into deferring it to another life, perhaps, or some utopian society to fight for, all of which, by the way, lack the very standards of purifying one's own mind, one's own heart. And what are these standards the Buddha delineated, talked about in his 84,000 teachings? 1, developing virtuous behavior, living and holding up to the 5 precepts. Now, these are not sometimes affair. We don't keep or maintain them for others. It's not a favor that you do for this person or your teacher. We do them because that's the way to cleanse one's heart, one's character, one's corruptions and defilements in the heart. 2, consistent conditioning of our thought process through observation of our thoughts and protecting the mind from unwholesome states and allowing it to not become agitated by this or that, and instead to allow it to go deeper into states of quiet awareness, whereby the 3rd standard comes in, which is a much clearer understanding that comes through, which we can call simply seeing deeply, seeing through, by ourselves, by the way, and not the words of others, or the collective, or the media, but one's own insight that comes through work. and tuning in to the heart, tuning in to the heart with trust. Anyhow, this is how I understand the Buddha's words in qualifying the Dhamma. One of the qualifiers where he said, Pachattam veditabbo vinyuhiti, to be realized by the wise, by themselves, for themselves. They feel it on their skin. They know it in their hearts. No one has to prove it to them. The Buddha never proved anything to his disciples about their attainments. They knew it. That's why they never believed in him. There was no question of a belief. They understood it. But please remember that these three, which basically describe to you the three trainings, Sila, Samadhi, Punya, these three are not the Dhamma itself. They simply are the three infallible and surefire trainings that are necessary to chisel out one's life in order for the Dhamma to appear in the heart, in order for us to see the Dhamma. And I will stop here and open to questions and comments, critiques, thoughts. Yes?
Venerable, I think that was a really wonderful talk and very, very useful for people these days, because there is so many people who are wanting to save the world, and like you say, they can't even stop swearing. Which, I mean, it's not necessarily always people's fault that either, because it's just a common. It happens so much, but you touched on. I mean, this talk would be very useful for a lot of people to hear it actually. So it'd be it would be nice if you could get it uploaded actually. It's very precious.
Yes?
I really like this paradox that you were talking about. So on the one hand, only the self, only myself can be enlightened, can learn Dhamma. I can just take classes or read or anything. So it has to come from within. But the most important lesson that you gave today is that it's precisely by totally abnegating the self to get beyond the me that you can achieve that state. Am I right in that kind of paradox that only the self can get into Dhamma, but in order to do that, one have to be totally get away from the ego. It's the opposite of trying to develop or even have a goal. Say, I want to achieve something, I want to do something. So I'd like you to say a little more how you do that, or how that is done. Given you're a teacher, and of course, you probably do want people to come to your class and all that. So how does one kind of mediate this not feeling hurt or not feeling upset if, say, no one come to listen to you? Is that okay? Because if, this is it's totally you have to get away from the sense of self. Is there some connection to that kind of thing?
Well, you've set up the arena for several different conversation pieces there for me to. It's okay, it's very. I can address several points. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say from within your comment / question. But I will attempt to address at least one or two. We, in a very quiet way, subtle way, we have already been giving up this sense of self, which I refer to as individuality. And that's where the collectivistic way of thinking, almost this Maoist way of thinking that the culture that we live in is going to, where my truth that I have gained, the individual, I mean, is less in importance versus what is being offered. So for me to be on the safest side of this thing called humanity is if I actually subscribe to this thing, even though it might be against my principles, for example. Many of us don't even have principles because of this terrible state in our educational system, which is massively corrupted throughout the world. And it comes from the humanities, from the social sciences and all that. I've taught in these fields myself. And also as a high school teacher, I've seen how the students, even from elementary, from junior high, they were being led, corralled into this state of ignorance where the personal, individual ownership of responsibility was dropping exponentially. So there's that element that I also see to be relevant. However, coming to the point where you asked, I believe it was about learning and studying on one's own. Now, please, I wouldn't want you to misunderstand the value of studying, of course. It's there, it needs to be there. We need to read, we need to explore, we need to understand what it is that I am pursuing, what it is that I am seeking. Okay, this person is talking about the Dhamma. Well, let me first understand what Dhamma is in connection to my life. Can I wrap my mind around it? So there needs to be some work done on the part of the individual. And that individual is all that matters ultimately, in the sense that the work needs to be done on that individual's, in that individual's life. Now, the individual is not living in a vacuum, of course. We're living in society. So if I light an incense, stick of incense, guess what? What is the thing that is burning? The stick of incense. Okay. But is it staying there? Is it glued to the stick? The fragrance, the smoke, and everything else, the chemical reactions that are taking place? No. It's permeating everywhere. The same happens when you have a cologne or a perfume bottle and you break it or open it up. It diffuses, the molecules diffuse into the area that is not saturated with the cologne or perfume, the thing. So when the person is having this transformation of understanding and insight, basically wisdom taking place, where the ignorance is lessening in one's mind, in one's heart, they're choosing to have a different form of responses with the outside world instead of living a reactionary life based on unwholesome ways of handling life. That's what my reference was in terms of nasty or bad seeds, unwholesome seeds of Kamma within one's mind or heart. Relinquishing those. That is an individual's work. But as the changes are happening within the person, just like that stick of incense that is permeating everywhere, the entire society indefinitely will change. The Buddha was one person. Let's not forget that. He was one person. And we're still talking about his teachings, and most importantly, individuals who have done what I have been discussing here with you today, have tasted what he did taste today in this world. They have tasted Nibbana. They are tasting Nibbana because they are following these steps of Sila, Samadhi, Panya. There's no secret about this. There's no magic about this. You put in the effort, you will get results. You put in what is needed, you will get results. No ifs and buts about this. But it requires a type of individual who is willing to risk it all, who is unafraid to become an individual, which says a lot. Now show me how many people can actually do that. That's the struggle that teachers have today, because we're living in a sensationalistic society. We want sensational things. We need colors and bells and whistles in this and that, including the Dhamma. Well, what am I going to get out of this? If I come and sit for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, am I going to get into a jhana? Am I going to experience this? How long does it take for me to become a sotapanna? So I hope that attempt at answering your question was satisfactory. Yes.
Thank you again, Bhante. Yeah, well, you know, I'm going to ask a question, even though I think I was advised that, you know, I should examine my own hindrances and corruption first, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. You know, I'm trying to reconcile, you know, freedom of the individual and freedom for the collective, because when I was young, I was kind of a pro-Maoist type of guy. And when I look at three people, just as an example, say John Lewis, the congressman, Aung San Suu Kyi, the Burmese leader, and also Gandhi, I think that what they did have in common is that their own intellectual and individual freedom, I think is premised upon the fact that if other people are not free, then they themselves actually really could not be free either. So I think in their actions, writings, and words, they try to combine them, you know, in their lives. And so how would you say it? I think, to me, it's a way of overcoming this dualism between just focusing on oneself, but I'm probably oversimplifying it, and also being responsible for the society in which you live in. Because as a citizen or as a member of civil society, I think, of course, you know, that's part of our responsibility, without negating our individual study or, you know, progress toward some sort of, you know, knowledge or wisdom. But I think that it's possible to combine both the freedom of the individual and say some sort of freedom for a collective or a larger group. Anyway, that's kind of my thinking, you know.
I don't see a difference between the two as far as the objective is concerned. I see them to be one and the same thing, because it trickles out, it permeates out of the same source, meaning the individual. Now, I personally have not met them, these individuals. I've read about them, and I've seen documentaries. However, these are documentaries, these are books about them. I've never lived with them. So that has to be, whenever I read a biography about someone, this and that, I always take it with a bucket of salt, because these are human beings, ultimately. So the test to an individual's character and objective, despite no matter how many noble actions they might have committed in their lifetime, is a formula that we get from the Buddha himself. Meaning, despite all the hoopla, despite all the bells and whistles about a person and what other people have been telling us, let's say they have earned, or not earned, but got 3-4 Nobel Prizes, peace prizes and whatever. They've become sanctified, the Vatican has turned them into saints, this and that, whatever. We need to ask a few questions, and they all happen to deal with the 3 defilements. these people have lobha, dosa, moha in their hearts, despite their actions, their obvious, observable, manifested actions? Do they have lust, greed, attachment in their hearts at any point? 2, do they have any sort of hatred, anger, aversion, ill will towards anyone or anything at any time? And 3, do they have any ignorance or delusion in their hearts? So when I read about individuals from history who might have actually really had vanquished these 3 defilements, I don't know. But ultimately, my encouragement here is, again, I'm only coming from the Theravada, the Buddhist path. I won't even call it Theravada anymore. The Buddhist path. I need to address it by using some key formulaic equations, if you will. So I'm not going to be bought in to this whole idea that this person was respected, so therefore they were doing both. Well, I don't know about their personal lives, because I've also read about Gandhi disrespecting his wife while she was pregnant, while he was running this whole movement, which no one knew about. By the way, this personal life, I don't know, again, if this is true or not. I've just read it someplace, but it raises an eyebrow. Because again, the collectivistic way of thinking to idolize is always in the undercurrent of our thinking. That's what I've noticed. Because it's simple. It kind of rounds off the edges. It simplifies things. It's rounding off the numbers, if you will. Because again, the attention is going to Gandhi. It's going to this person, to that person. So in a very relaxed way, I would say, who cares? I'm living my life. Where do I fall into this whole thing in vis-a-vis defilements, my defilements? If Gandhi was a saint, beautiful. Beautiful for him. And to this day, people are inspired by him. Wonderful again. But again, the attention always falls upon the person you look and see in the mirror. Always. Only in that context I say, who cares? When it has to do with you, the person. Because when the time comes for us to leave this world, I would be leaving this world. To what world? To whatever state? I will be responsible for that. Not Gandhi. Hence, who cares? And if I change my life, if there are no more defilements in my heart, guess what? The world has already changed. Not at a certain point in the future, by the way, but from this moment where I go, aha, aha. Even the way I tie up the garbage bag before I even take it outside. I'm putting off some interesting vibes there. My neighbors are going to notice. My dog, my cat is going to notice that. So who cares for others? Because if you are permeating this fragrance, this delicious fragrance of wisdom within your life, the entire universe, this planet, is inevitably going to feel it and be transformed thanks to you taking action, not relying on what some other person has said, done, or thought, or whether other people say this or that about them, about you. So that would be my attempt at answering.
No, okay. I mean, you know, just to be fair, I think people like Aung San Suu Kyi, she did not ask for all these prizes. And also, of course, she's been criticized, you know, about the Rohingya and so forth, you know. And I assume I believe I don't know whether she's a Buddhist or not, but still, I mean, of course, people have contradictions and whatever defilements in their personality. But on the whole, I think one has to, you know, still have, well, at least for me, I still need to, because I'm very limited intellectually and emotionally and stuff. So I need to basically look to others to get a glimpse of, you know, what might be possible.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at them as individuals, not as necessarily as icons. I just brought them up because they're sort of household names, you know what I mean?
It's similar to what I was suggesting earlier about studying through books. So characters, individuals, biographies, individuals who are still living, like the ones you just mentioned, one of them at least, it can become areas of study. But again, only in the context of how is this influencing my understanding of my own seeds, unwholesome seeds in my heart, of the defilements. That's what I always will bring back to this drainage hole, okay? It always has to drain there within your own heart. So which the responsibility to clean it up is one's own. No amount of studying is ever going to do that for us. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So your comments today that we should be working on ourselves first, rather than to try and change the world in the greater world, and that's part of the cause of some of the conflict out there. Everyone's trying to change other people. So that seems completely true to me intellectually, but together with the challenge in my practice of limiting myself, or view that there is a self, seeing myself as separate from other people, which I believe is a habit. So I'm practicing on not seeing that way, and hopefully that becoming a habit, that I can do that. But it just seems to me, at least right now, to clash a little bit with what yourself, if I'm not distinguishing my view as a self, when I see things, defilements that need work, if I see defilements out in the community, the thing that's separate from myself, how can I also not try and work on reducing those defilements out in the community when I see them? I can't say that's out there and I can ignore that. Let's focus on this self, when I'm trying to not have a self. There should be just a defilement or not a defilement, and should I take action when the action is required?
When you say, when I'm looking at myself and I identify these defilements within myself, and then I look outside of myself in the world and I see those defilements, what you said in the beginning is very, very interesting, because it indicates to me that you already have a standard well in place. That means the individual has a core to use as a reference point from which they can look up outside and observe the world that needs changing. Beautiful. Nowhere did I say or mention where we need to become indifferent to the world. No. The problem lies in many, many individuals in our society today who lack this core that you spoke of. The standard of at least acknowledging what are defilements and what are not. And the person would know if there is an absence of those defilements within oneself, at that time at least. But they're very cognizant of it. Hence, when they see it outside, because they become used to it, identifying it within their bodies and their hearts and their minds, absolutely, we hold the responsibility to change ourselves and by extension to change the world. See, the Buddha was the most engaged individual, humanistically engaged individual in all of our history as human beings. And later generations of Buddhists actually criticized him for that. And not just him, but the Arahants, saying that, oh, they're very self-centered. What a bunch of rubbish. Absolute nonsense. For 45 years, he was changing the entire society around him. So the person, and that your example serves beautifully, the way I understand it, as to what I was referring to with the incense stick. The person is working on themselves, hence the understanding and acknowledgement of there being a defilement within me. And by extension, they also see things outside. Hence, the person goes outside and changes the world without losing the focus. Remember, I've used the example of flight attendants. When you go in to before the takeoff, they do the routine. Now, every single human being who's ever been on a flight, on a plane, knows and never will argue this. When the flight attendant comes around and talks about the oxygen mask, they will say, even if your child, your own flesh and blood is sitting next to you, an infant, you do not put the oxygen mask on them first. You put it on yourself first. That's what my suggestion, my encouragement here is. That's what the Buddha has been encouraging his listeners, his readers for 45 years, not readers, listeners for 45 years to do. So I'm redirecting our attention, this modern day human beings, to look back at what this flight attendant is trying to say. If I don't save myself, let me just stop it and not fool anyone, including myself, by saying, well, I'm going to be able to save. Look at me, how good, how Gandhi-esque I am by taking care of this child. But what if something happens and I lose consciousness? There goes you and the child, and probably other people that I might have been able to save after the crash.
But also, we shouldn't wait until we've got rid of our defilements. We shouldn't need to be an arahant before we start taking action. Otherwise, no one would ever teach, because unless you've got rid of all of your defilements, when do you start?
Oh, it's like when we're learning a language, you don't necessarily need to know all the vocabulary or the grammar, all this and that, in order for you to start having a conversation, to convey your ideas and understand someone else's ideas, even if it's not your native language. It's similar to that, and also from our lives. I don't have to be fastest runner in the world in order for me to run fast enough to save a child from falling off into an abyss. So we need to also use reason when we're hearing the Dhamma. Of course, as I'm becoming more cognizant and aware of my own defilements, that means I'm already working on them. So it does not necessitate for us to reach a certain cap, after, like arahantship, in order for us to go on and help. I never suggested that. But the work is together. As I'm working on myself, I am inevitably changing and working on the world around me. So thank you for bringing that up, because I wouldn't want you to walk away from today's session thinking that that was what was being encouraged here. Because that would prove later Mahayanas and Vajrayanas to be true about the earlier teaching of the Buddha, which they're not. Because Arahants would put down, we're always like, oh, they're very self-centered. And after 30 years of studying the suttas, I've yet to see a single person, a single Arahant, let alone an Arahant, even Anathapindika, who was a lay person, who was a Sotapanna at the first stage, to be self-centered. There's so much generosity, so much love, so much giving, and going out of one's way. The Buddha would cross hundreds of miles to go simply because he knew that there was one person ready to reach a certain stage that day. So, thank you for lovely questions. I appreciate it. We can go over if you, yes.
Bhante, I think here I feel that it needs to be added that in the grander, something you have mentioned many, many times, but that in the grander scheme of things, dana, generosity, is only the first part of the practice. There's dana, sila, samadhi, panya. So again, if we take a broader picture at what we are trying to do with the practice of the Dhamma, of course, generosity has a place, a big one, and yet it's part of the process. It's not the whole process, and wisdom does not exclude generosity. Wisdom and generosity, as well as sila or samadhi and generosity, are not mutually exclusive. They go concurrently, and yet they need to be there also, you know. And I also wanted to mention that we talk a lot about changing the world. Perhaps it's worth individually for anyone to investigate what that looks like. You know, it sounds wonderful to change the world, but let's break it down as to what it looks like. How are we, you know, on the ground, practically speaking, what does it look like changing the world? If we come up with a few types of actions or examples for ourselves, I think it could be interesting to investigate that and see how to really ask the question, is it helping, or investigate that process, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I think that could be helpful.
Thank you for that. And in biology, when I taught biology, you know, there's when cells reproduce, especially when it's mitosis, just regular cells in the body, if you're dealing with a cell that is already corrupted, or it's nearing its end phase, it's about to die, and it's still reproducing, or it's, you know, it's messed up genetically, the DNA is not proper, and it goes ahead and multiplies, it's like using, you know, it's like a Xerox machine, copier. So when a person is changing the world and they themselves have a screwed up DNA, let's say, of wisdom, good luck. See, when people say, I want to change the world, I just take 10 steps back. I was like, okay, settle down. What do we mean by that? What do you mean by changing the world? Because underneath it all, as a clinical psychotherapist, I'm looking at other factors. I'm observing, I'm assessing. And soon enough, oftentimes these people that want to change the world, many of them, I wouldn't say all of them, there are underlying issues there. Seeking to be loved, accepted, this and that. And that's why the Buddha's mechanism was beautiful. It's brilliant, because many other sects used to come and challenge his own bhikkhus and saying, well, we also are bhikkhus, we are also ascetics, we are also practicing mental cultivation, we are also, we call our attainment nibbana or nirvana or something like that. So what's the difference between you and us, your teacher and our teacher? And many times these bhikkhus didn't have an answer because on the surface it made perfect logical sense. So without risking saying a wrong thing, they go back to the Buddha, and the Buddha says, next time somebody says something like that, challenges you, ask them this very simple question. When your teacher, well, first of all, your teacher, can you categorically say that he does not have lobha, dosa, moha, greed, attachment, aversion, hatred, anger, ignorance, delusion? And if they're being honest, they will always say, well, I've noticed him sometimes getting angry at this point. I know that he really loves that thing, and if he doesn't get it, he's not going to be a happy camper. But everything else is perfect. He's so wise. Guess what? He failed the test, the Buddha's test. So when we are trying to change the world, transforming the world, let's first identify, where am I coming from? Is there anger? Is there at least anger in me? Forget about the other person. Is there anger in me towards this person, this group, this individual who seems to hate my guts, who seems to come after my family, who seems to want to do the opposite of what I want? Okay. Remember the simile of the saw the Buddha uses. Kakachupama Sutta. The Buddha says, if that moment comes and there are two individuals with a hacksaw, with a big, big tree cutting saw, and they're using it upon you by cutting you in half at your midsection, if you happen to entertain even the tiniest, slightest thought of hatred, you are not my student. You are not practicing what I have taught you. Wow. Now show me a person who wants to change the world, having that mindset, having that position, and I'm just, wow. We're possibly dealing with an arahant here. Now, of course, coming back to your earlier thought, do we want a person to get to that level first before they change? Not necessarily. But at least the person is cognizant that they are not there yet. But they're working on it. Instead of putting the focus on the outside world, which is what I see happening, which is based on wrong view, which is based on ignorance, no matter all the rose-colored, all the hoopla that goes along with that. It's all nonsense. Because the person is simply running away from responsibility of cutting themselves off of samsara, which takes a lot of work. It takes guts and it takes courage. It takes risking it all attitude on a moment-to-moment basis. The Buddha says, show me a person who can control their mind, even for an instant. They are far more in value than a person who wins 1,000 battles against 1,000 armies 1,000 times over. Those cannot even compare, like, to 1/16th of whatever, to what that person has accomplished, even for that brief moment in time where they were able to control their mind. He was a very practical person that our humanity today desperately needs. We don't need these sensational teachings. We don't need these, we need some tough love in the Dhamma. And that's what, that is what my understanding is anyhow. Given my practice and given my presence on this planet and what I have seen thus far, and especially in the field of education, Dhamma. So, yes, so I know we covered a lot, and if you have any questions and thoughts, please shoot emails my way, because we're past the point. 10 minutes now, but I would be more than happy to address any unanswered questions if there were. So please let us share some merits. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition and achievement of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, and devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. So.
Thank you, Bhante.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you.
See you all next week. And yes, be well. Stay safe.
You too, Bhante.
Keep smiling.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.